The Kalari Federation had lived in perfect peace for 3,000 years. Imagine a civilization that had never known war, never built weapons, never even argued about territory. Their worlds were like gardens in space, covered with crystal. Cities that sparkled in the sunlight and floating parks that drifted through the clouds. The Kalari themselves looked almost like living glass, with blue skin you could see through and gentle voices that never raised in anger. Ambassador Phelan had served his people for 200 years, always dealing with happy news like new trade agreements or scientific discoveries. But today was different. His hands shook as he stood before the Emergency Council, watching the holographic displays that showed destruction beyond anything his peaceful mind could understand. The outer colonies had gone silent one by one. First, the mining world of Kalaris 7 stopped responding. Then the agricultural planet Verdania went dark. Each time, the last transmissions were the same, screaming voices reporting something massive in the sky, something that blocked out the sun. Kalaris Prime is gone, Thielen said, his voice barely a whisper. The council chamber, usually filled with calm discussion, fell completely silent. Kalaris Prime had been their crown jewel, home to 15 billion Kolari, living in floating cities that moved with the seasons. Elder Mireth, the oldest member of their species, at nearly 800 years old, lifted one of her forearms with great effort. Her entire body was shaking now. What do you mean, ... gone? Phelan touched a control, and the hologram changed to show what used to be Kalaris Prime, where once a beautiful blue-green world had spun peacefully. Now there was only a brown, dead rock. The oceans had been drained. The atmosphere had been stripped away. Even the metal from their cities had been torn from the ground. The swarm doesn't just kill, Phelan explained, fighting back tears. They consume everything. Every tree, every drop of water, every breath of air. They leave nothing behind but empty stone. The thing that terrified the Kalari most was how fast it happened. The swarm could strip an entire world clean in just a few days. Their exploration ships, designed only for peaceful contact with other species, tried to evacuate people but were simply swatted aside like insects. The Kalari had never needed to build warships because they had never imagined needing to fight. Council Member Zareth spoke up, his voice filled with despair. How many more worlds do we have? How long before they reach our core systems? Based on their movement pattern, Thielen said, pulling up star charts, they will reach our capital world in less than 30 days, and we have nothing that can stop them. The room erupted in panicked voices. Some council members suggested hiding on remote planets. Others wanted to load everyone onto ships and flee to the far edge of the galaxy. But Elder Mireth raised her arms for silence. We cannot run from this, she said sadly. They move too fast, and we are too many. Our only hope is to find someone who can help us fight. So they activated the Great Transmitter, a massive communication array built for contacting distant civilizations. The message was simple, but desperate. This is the Kalari Federation. We are a peaceful people, facing complete destruction. We have no weapons, no armies, no way to defend ourselves. If anyone in the galaxy has the power to help us, please respond. We will give you anything we have in return. The signal traveled out in all directions, moving faster than light through subspace channels. It passed by hundreds of civilized worlds where other peaceful species lived. It reached the domains of the wise ethereal collective, who were too far away to help in time. It touched the borders of the Merchant Guild, who had no military power of their own. But the signal didn't stop at the edges of civilized space. It kept traveling, moving into regions that appeared on star maps, with warnings written in red letters, past the barriers that kept dangerous species contained, into sectors, marked with skull symbols and labels like extreme hazard and authorized personnel only. Finally, after traveling for days across the galaxy, the desperate cry for help reached a small blue-green planet orbiting a young yellow star. The inhabitants of this world had only recently developed faster-than-light travel. Their star charts labeled them as a developing species that should be left alone to grow peacefully. But if the Kolari had known what kind of world had received their message, they might have chosen to face the swarm alone, because the planet that picked up their signal was a death world, covered with violent weather, poisonous creatures, and a species that had climbed to the top of their food chain by being more dangerous than everything else that wanted to kill them. The humans had heard their call for help. Admiral Jake Morrison was enjoying his morning coffee when the alien distress signal arrived. The bridge of the USS Valkyrie hummed with quiet activity as the night shift prepared to hand over control to the day crew. Jake had been in space for 20 years, ever since the Centauri Wars ended, and he thought he'd seen everything the galaxy could throw at humanity. The communication officer, Lieutenant Amy Chen, looked up from her console with confusion written all over her face. "Sir, we're getting something weird on the long-range channels. It's definitely alien, but the translation software is having trouble with some of the concepts." Jake set down his coffee and walked over to her station. The message was playing on repeat, and even through the mechanical translation, he could hear the desperation in the alien voices. They were talking about being peaceful, about having no weapons, about facing something called the swarm that was eating their worlds. "Run it through the cultural database," Jake ordered. "See if we can figure out what kind of species we're dealing with." The results made the bridge crew exchange worried glances. The Kolari appeared to be a completely pacifist species. No military history, no weapons development. They'd never even fought a war against their own kind. To the human crew, who had grown up learning about World War II and the Battle of Mars, this seemed almost impossible to believe. Captain Lisa Rodriguez, Jake's second-in-command, studied the tactical display showing the Kolari sector. "This swarm thing has already consumed 17 star systems. Moving fast, stripping planets completely clean. Looks like a standard bug hunt to me, sir." Jake nodded. Humanity had dealt with hive minds before. The Zerg-like creatures of Proxima Centauri had taught them valuable lessons about fighting swarm-type enemies. The key was overwhelming firepower and no mercy. You couldn't negotiate with something that saw you as food. "All right, people, looks like we've got refugees to evacuate and bugs to squash," Jake announced. "Signal to Roosevelt, Washington, and Texas. We'll take a light patrol force. Don't want to scare these peaceful aliens by showing up with a full battle group." The crew began preparing for departure with practiced efficiency. They'd done evacuation missions before, usually when human colonies were threatened by natural disasters or hostile aliens. The procedure was always the same. Get in fast, establish a safe perimeter, evacuate civilians, then deal with whatever threat remained. What none of the humans realized was how their definition of a light patrol force would look to the rest of the galaxy. The 4 ships Jake had chosen were considered medium-sized by human standards. The USS Roosevelt was a heavy cruiser designed for long-range patrol work. The Washington and Texas were destroyer escorts, meant to hunt down enemy ships and protect supply lines, but humans built their ships differently than other species. Every human vessel was designed with one simple philosophy: if you're going to fight, fight to win. The Roosevelt alone carried enough firepower to level a continent. Her main guns could punch through the armor of a space station from 1,000 miles away. Her missile tubes could launch nuclear warheads that would make the old Earth bombs look like firecrackers. The escort destroyers were even more dangerous in their own way. Fast and heavily armed, they were designed to hunt down enemy fleets and destroy them before they could escape. Each one carried weapons that could crack open an asteroid, and armor thick enough to survive flying through a sun's corona. As the small human fleet prepared to jump to hyperspace, other species monitoring stations picked up their energy signatures and immediately started sending panicked reports to their governments. The weapons readings they were getting seemed impossible. No civilized species built ships with that much destructive capability. The ethereal collective, known throughout the galaxy for their advanced technology, ran the numbers 3 times before accepting them. The human light patrol force carried more firepower than their entire home defense fleet. The merchant guild's computers crashed, trying to calculate the economic cost of building weapons that powerful, but the humans saw nothing unusual about their preparations. Jake Morrison had fought in wars where entire planets were turned into battlefields. His crew had served in campaigns where the choice was between total victory and complete extinction. To them, the Kalari situation looked like a straightforward rescue mission. Save the civilians. Kill the bugs. Go home for dinner. Hyperspace jump in 30 seconds, announced the navigation officer. Destination Kalari space. Estimated arrival 14 hours. Jake looked out at the stars through the bridge windows, thinking about the peaceful aliens who had sent their desperate message. He genuinely wanted to help them. Humanity had a soft spot for underdogs and refugees. They'd learned long ago that the galaxy was a dangerous place, and sometimes good people needed someone to stand up for them. What he didn't know was that his light patrol force was about to become the most feared fleet in galactic history, and that his simple rescue mission would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. The Kalari had asked for help, and help was coming. They just had no idea what they were about to receive. When the human ships arrived in Kalari space, Ambassador Thielen felt a mixture of hope and terror he'd never experienced before. The energy readings from the approaching vessels were beyond anything in their databases. These weren't exploration ships or even the largest warships the Kalari had ever heard of. These were something entirely different. The meeting was arranged aboard the Kalari flagship Peaceful Dawn, a beautiful vessel that looked more like a work of art than a spaceship. Its curves flowed like water, and its hull was made from a special crystal that sparkled with soft light. Everything about it spoke of a civilization that valued beauty and harmony above all else. Thielen had prepared for this moment carefully. He expected to meet wise beings, perhaps ancient aliens, with advanced technology, who would offer to relocate his people to safety. Maybe they would share defensive systems that could protect the remaining Kalari worlds. At best, they might even have some way to communicate with the swarm and convince them to stop their destruction. What walked through the airlock was nothing like what he had imagined. Admiral Jake Morrison stepped onto the Kalari ship, and every survival instinct Thielen had developed over 2 centuries started screaming danger signals. The human moved with a fluid grace that reminded Thielen of the great predators from ancient Kalari legends. His eyes constantly swept the room, cataloging exits and potential threats. Scars covered his hands and face, telling stories of violence that no Kalari could even imagine. Behind Jake came his senior officers. Captain Lisa Rodriguez had the same predatory awareness, her hand resting casually near what was obviously a weapon. Lieutenant Amy Chen carried herself like someone ready to fight at a moment's notice. Even their simple movements spoke of a species that had climbed to the top of their world's food chain by being more dangerous than everything else. Ambassador Thielen, I presume, Jake said, extending his hand in what the translation software identified as a human greeting gesture. When Thielen cautiously touched the offered hand, he was shocked by the strength in Jake's grip. The human could have crushed his delicate fingers without effort. Jake pulled up a holographic display, showing the consumed Kalari worlds. To Thielen, each dead planet represented billions of lost lives, cultures erased forever, histories that would never be told again. But Jake studied the images like a scientist examining bacteria under a microscope. So these swarm things, Jake said, his tone conversational, they're basically space locusts, right? They show up, eat everything, then move on to the next target. How many worlds did you say they've hit so far? 17 complete systems, Thielen replied, his voice shaking with emotion. Over 50 billion of my people are gone. Our most beautiful worlds, our oldest cities, our greatest libraries, and art collections, all reduced to empty rock. Jake nodded, as if Thielen had just told him about the weather. Okay, standard bug infestation then. We'll need to implement sterilization protocols on all the consumed systems. Can't risk leaving any spores or eggs behind that might start a new swarm later. The word sterilization didn't translate properly, so the computer provided several possible meanings. When Thielen understood that Jake was talking about completely destroying the star systems where his people had lived, he felt dizzy with shock. You want to, destroy our former worlds? Thielen asked weakly. Glass them? Yeah, Jake replied matter-of-factly. It's the only way to be sure. These hive mind species are tricky. They leave behind genetic material that can restart the whole cycle. We learned that lesson the hard way during the Centauri campaigns. Captain Rodriguez stepped forward, apparently trying to be helpful. Don't worry about civilian casualties, Ambassador. We've dealt with swarm species before. The key is total warfare. You hit them with everything you've got. Leave no survivors. Give them no chance to adapt to your tactics. Elder Mirith, who had been listening quietly in the corner, suddenly collapsed. Her ancient body couldn't handle the stress of realizing that their saviors were casually discussing genocide as if it were a routine maintenance task. The other Kaleri delegation members rushed to help her, their translucent skin turning pale. With horror, Lieutenant Chen, noticing the aliens' distress, tried to reassure them. Look, I know this sounds harsh, but we've seen what happens when you show mercy to these kinds of enemies. They use your compassion against you. The only language they understand is force. Jake pulled up tactical displays showing human battle formations. We'll establish a kill zone perimeter around your remaining systems. Anyone goes in, nothing comes out. Then we'll hunt down every last one of these bugs and make sure they never threaten anyone again. Thielen stared at the human battle plans, trying to understand what he was seeing. The formations were designed for one purpose: complete annihilation of the enemy. There was no provision for prisoners, no plans for communication attempts, no consideration of mercy or negotiation. It was warfare reduced to its most basic element, the total destruction of one side by the other. This is how your species handles conflicts? Thielen asked in a whisper. Jake looked genuinely puzzled by the question. Well, yeah. When something threatens innocent people, you destroy it completely. Otherwise, it just comes back stronger. We learned that lesson from our own history. Sometimes being kind just gets more people killed in the long run. The Kaleri delegation looked at each other with growing terror. They had called for help, and help had arrived. But their saviors were more frightening than the monsters they were fleeing from. The humans spoke of total war, acceptable losses, and complete destruction as casually as the Kaleri discussed art and philosophy. What terrified Thielen most was the growing realization that these humans actually cared about helping his people. They weren't evil or malicious. They were genuinely trying to save the Kalari Federation. This was simply how they solved problems, with overwhelming violence applied without hesitation or mercy. The galaxy was about to learn what happened when a peaceful species asked for help from apex predators. The swarm came like a dark tide across space, just as they had 17 times before. Their bioships moved in perfect coordination, millions of living vessels that pulsed with alien hunger. Each ship was grown rather than built, with acidic weapons that could dissolve metal and organic hulls that could repair themselves. They had never met resistance they couldn't overcome by sheer numbers and relentless aggression. Admiral Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the USS Valkyrie, watching his tactical display as red dots filled the screen. The swarm's arrival looked like a computer glitch at first. There were simply too many contacts for the sensors to count accurately. Wave after wave of bioships poured out of hyperspace, creating clouds so thick they blocked out the light from nearby stars. Sir, we're reading over 2 million individual hostiles, reported Lieutenant Amy Chen from her sensor station. They're moving in standard swarm formation, but the sheer size of this fleet is beyond anything in our combat records. Jake sipped his coffee and studied the enemy formation with professional interest. During the Centauri Wars, humanity had learned to fight hive minds, but never on this scale. The largest swarm they'd previously encountered had maybe 50,000 ships. This looked like the entire swarm species had arrived for one final feeding. Well, that's convenient, Jake said calmly. Saves us the trouble of hunting them down later. All ships, weapons free. Primary targets are the larger bioships, probably command vessels. Secondary targets are anything that tries to run. The Kalari observers aboard their own ships watched in growing horror as the human fleet prepared for battle. Ambassador Thea had positioned several Kalari vessels at what they thought was a safe distance, expecting to witness a desperate last stand by their human allies. Instead, he saw something that would haunt his dreams forever. The USS Roosevelt, humanity's heavy cruiser, fired first. Her main gun, a weapon designed to crack open heavily armored space stations, sent a beam of pure energy into the heart of the swarm formation. Where the beam touched the bioships, they simply ceased to exist. No explosion, no debris, just empty space where thousands of living creatures had been moments before. But that was just the beginning. The Roosevelt's secondary guns opened up, each shot destroying dozens of swarm vessels. Her missile tubes launched nuclear warheads that created brief suns in the darkness, vaporizing everything within miles of the blast. In 30 seconds of firing, she had eliminated more enemies than the entire Kalari fleet could have destroyed in a year of fighting. The destroyer, USS Washington, took a different approach. Instead of using massive weapons, she deployed clouds of hunter-killer drones, small, fast robots designed to chase down fleeing enemies. Each drone was barely larger than a person, but carried enough explosives to gut a battleship. They moved through the swarm formation like deadly insects, seeking out bioships that tried to escape and destroying them with surgical precision. Captain Rodriguez, commanding the USS Texas, decided to field test humanity's newest weapon system. The experimental plasma charges were designed for clearing out asteroid fields, but they worked just as well on biological targets. Each charge created a ball of superheated gas that expanded outward like a miniature star, turning everything it touched into basic atomic particles. The Kalari watching from their observation. Ships couldn't understand what they were seeing. Where they expected to see a desperate battle between good and evil, they instead witnessed what looked like casual extermination. The humans weren't fighting the swarm, they were systematically erasing it from existence with the efficiency of farmers clearing weeds from a field. "Sir," reported Captain Lisa Harper, monitoring communications from the Kalari ships, "Ambassador Thielen is requesting that we attempt to communicate with the swarm. He wants to know if there might be some way to negotiate a peaceful solution." Jake paused in his tactical planning and looked at her with genuine confusion. Communicate with a hive mind that eats planets. What exactly would we negotiate about? Their right to consume innocent people. The question highlighted the vast cultural gap between humans and Kalari. The peaceful aliens still believed that all conflicts could be resolved through dialogue and understanding. They couldn't comprehend a species that existed only to consume and destroy, just as they couldn't understand humans who could commit total warfare without hesitation or regret. As the battle continued, the swarm began to realize they faced something unprecedented. Their bioships had evolved over millions of years to strip planets clean, but they had never encountered resistance like this. Every tactical adaptation they tried was countered instantly. Every escape route was blocked by those terrible human drones. Every attempt to overwhelm the human ships with numbers failed against weapons that could destroy thousands of targets with each shot. The turning point came when the swarm tried their ultimate tactic, a coordinated kamikaze assault by their largest bioship. They had used this strategy successfully against dozens of civilizations, overwhelming defenses through sheer suicidal determination. But when millions of swarm vessels charged directly at the human fleet, Jake simply ordered his ships to implement maximum firepower protocols. What followed would have been beautiful if it weren't so terrifying. Every weapon on every human ship fired simultaneously, creating a wall of energy that stretched across space. The charging swarm hit that wall and simply disappeared, converted into light and heat and scattered atoms. 6 hours after it began, the battle was over. The tactical display that had been filled with red enemy contacts now showed nothing but empty space and drifting debris. 2 million swarm bioships had been reduced to molecular dust. Not a single human vessel had taken significant damage. In the silence that followed, Ambassador Thielen found himself staring at his own sensor readings, unable to believe what he was seeing. An enemy that had consumed 17 star systems, that had seemed unstoppable and infinitely dangerous, had been completely erased from existence in less than half a day. The humans had won, but their victory was so complete and so merciless that it terrified their allies more than the original threat ever had. The Kaleri had asked for help against monsters, and their saviors had proven to be far more monstrous than anything they could have imagined. 3 months had passed since what the humans called Operation Pest Control, and what the rest of the galaxy was calling the Great Cleansing. Ambassador Thielen stood in his crystal office on the Kaleri homeworld, looking down at the gardens, where his people had played peacefully for thousands of years. But the gardens weren't quite the same. Any more human families had moved in as part of the cultural exchange program that Admiral Morrison had suggested. Thielen watched a human mother push her young daughter on a swing, while Kaleri children gathered around, fascinated by these strange alien visitors. The human child couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with bright blonde hair and innocent blue eyes. She looked harmless enough. Then she jumped off the swing in mid-flight, executed a perfect combat roll, and popped back up in a fighting stance that would have impressed Kaleri military instructors. The Kaleri children backed away nervously, their survival instincts, recognizing predatory movement patterns that their peaceful species had forgotten millions of years ago. "Want to learn how to fight?" the human girl asked cheerfully, completely unaware that she had just demonstrated more tactical awareness than most Kaleri adults possessed. "My daddy taught me this really cool move where you use someone's weight against them." Thielen sighed and turned away from the window. The humans hadn't lied when they said they would help. They had done exactly what they promised. The swarm was gone, not just defeated, but completely extinct. Human patrol ships now guarded every Kaleri system with weapons that could glass planets. Pirates, raiders, and aggressive neighbors had all received the same message. The Kaleri Federation was under human protection, and humanity took their protective duties very seriously. The problem was what came after the protection. "Sir," whispered his aide Kent, stepping into the office quietly. "The Galactic Council is asking for another emergency session about the human situation. The Ethereal Collective is particularly concerned about the ... changes." Thielen knew what changes Kent meant. The humans hadn't been content to simply destroy the swarm and leave. Admiral Morrison had taken one look at Kaleri society and declared it tactically vulnerable to future threats. What followed was a systematic restructuring of their entire civilization. Kaleri schools now included mandatory classes on situational awareness and basic survival skills. Children learned to identify potential threats, plan escape routes, and recognize the signs of hostile behavior. The humans called it life skills education, but it felt like teaching flowers how to bite. Trade agreements had been renegotiated to ensure that human military contractors could maintain their protection fleet indefinitely. The Kaleri now provided rare crystals and advanced sensors in exchange for security services. It was a fair deal by galactic standards, but it meant the humans were never going away. Most disturbing were the social changes. Young Kaleri who spent time around human families were starting to act differently. They asked more questions, challenged authority more often, and showed an alarming tendency to think about potential threats. The humans called it healthy skepticism, but Kaleri elders worried their children were losing their essential peaceful nature. The council wants to know if there's any way to reduce the human presence, Kent continued carefully. Some species are suggesting that the Kaleri situation represents a dangerous precedent. Thielen almost laughed. The galactic community was terrified, and he couldn't blame them. Word had spread quickly through civilized space about humanity's casual display of overwhelming firepower. The Merchant Guild had run economic analyses, showing that a single human cruiser carried more destructive potential than entire planetary defense networks. The ethereal collective's wisest philosophers were debating whether humans represented the next stage of evolution or a cosmic mistake. Military commanders across the galaxy had studied the tactical reports from the swarm battle and quietly shelved any aggressive expansion plans. The message was clear. If you attacked someone under human protection, you wouldn't just face retaliation, you'd face extinction. Outside his office, Thielen could hear human children playing with Kaleri youngsters. The human kids were teaching a game they called Capture the Flag, which involved complex team tactics, territory control, and strategic thinking. The Kaleri children were struggling to understand concepts like flanking maneuvers and tactical retreats, but they were learning. That was what worried Thielen most. His people were adapting to their protectors, becoming more like them in small ways, every day. The changes weren't evil or destructive, they were actually quite practical. Kaleri, who learned human-style thinking, were better at solving problems, more aware of their surroundings, and more confident in challenging situations. But they were also becoming less purely peaceful, less trusting, less innocent. The humans weren't trying to corrupt Kaleri culture. They genuinely wanted to help their new friends survive in a dangerous galaxy. But their help came with strings attached, and those strings were slowly weaving a web that would be impossible to escape. "What should I tell the council?" Kent asked nervously. Thielen looked out at the gardens one more time, watching human and Kaleri children play together under the protection of orbital defense platforms that could crack moons. Admiral Morrison walked by, chatting with a group of Kaleri engineers about upgrading their planetary shields. He genuinely cared about Kaleri welfare and worked tirelessly to ensure their safety. "Tell them," Thielen said slowly, "that the humans saved us exactly as they promised. They eliminated our enemies, protected our people, and secured our future. They've been nothing but helpful and considerate allies." He paused, watching as the human girl taught a Kaleri child how to break free from a grab, a skill no Kaleri had ever needed before. "And tell them that's exactly what makes them so terrifying." The galaxy had learned a fundamental truth. Sometimes salvation came with teeth, claws, and an absolute refusal to let go of what it protected. The Kaleri had asked for help from the darkness beyond civilized space, and help had answered. Now, they would live forever in safety, under the watchful eyes of predators who loved them too much to ever let them face danger alone. The age of human protection had begun, and there was no going back.